Right now, my big project is a history of bilingualism in English Canada. Effectively, what I'm doing is
huge.
It is huge, so I'll narrow that down a bit. What I'm looking at is the period from the 1960s to the 1990s, mostly, looking at different ways in which bilingualism was being promoted to English-speaking Canadians and how they responded to those efforts. So it's a mix of looking at groups that were very keen on the idea of bilingualism. So a large chunk of what I'm looking at of the material I'm looking at involves French immersion advocacy groups like Canadian Parents for French, which was very active in pushing for the creation of French immersion, lobbying provincial governments and federal governments, putting out material for parents who were unsure about whether or not this was the right idea for their children. It involves looking at agents within government or that are sort of arm's length from government, like the Commissioner of Official Languages. A really fun piece of what I'm working on right now is this series of board games that office put out that were aimed at Canadian school children, designed to get them interested in the idea of learning two languages and what that could do. Side of what I'm looking at is groups that thought that bilingualism was going to be the end of English Canada, that this was part of a French conspiracy to take over the country. So I've been looking at a fair bit of anti-French, anti-bilingualism literature and some of the conspiracy books that came out. My favorite one was actually a multi-$1,000 seller called Bilingual Today, French Tomorrow, Trudeau's Master Plan and How It Can Be Stopped. And part of it is just anti-French rhetoric that inspires that, but it's also tied up in broader concerns about changing Canadian identity and what this was going to mean for job security for people who didn't speak French already or didn't think they'd be able to learn French. Different conceptions about what this was going to cost the government. So, I mean, part of me wants to either laugh it off or view it as the ravings of a couple of conspiracy theorists, but you also have to take it seriously because so many Canadians did oppose bilingualism for a variety of reasons. But conversely, others thought this was going to be really important. And for some, it was an ideological thing. For others, this was a pragmatic way to help their children have a better chance in the job market in the future. So I'm looking at a variety of different ways in which that played out in Canada in different provinces from the 60s up until about the 90s. Well, the issue of English-French relations in Canada is one of the biggest threads that ties Canadian history together. It's this ongoing tension about how do you have two large linguistic communities living together. How do you accommodate their different demands and needs? It always plays out in terms of constitutional politics, in terms of federal politics. For the last 20-odd years, we've had a fairly dysfunctional parliament because Quebec has not felt its needs were represented by the major parties, and so you've had the bloc acting as this effectively a bloc, to use a really bad pun, but blocking national politics from being really inclusive of Quebec. Quebecers have become more and more disengaged from national politics, and a lot of that's tied into how English Canadians have responded to the French fact in Canada. And I think it's important to understand why it is that Canadians do respond to language issues the way that they do, because this is the sort of thing that if you understand how it's worked in the past, you could perhaps apply some of those lessons to policy directions for the future. It's not a case necessarily of using the past to predict the future, but to learn from what worked and what hasn't worked and see how you might be able to apply that in concrete ways.